Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Bringing you the latest from the world of daily fantasy sports and gambling, so you can stop Googling how to join a squid game to cover all those parlays you thought were such a sure thing. Now, sit back and listen to one of the sharpest minds in the game. Here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello, everyone. We have our last, but certainly not least, region in the East. Baylor, overall number 1 seed. Kentucky, the number 2 seed. And I gotta say, Kentucky is the chalk pick to come out of this region. But I gotta mention a couple other squads that I don't think have nearly gotten enough shine in this region, namely being UCLA and what we now know as Indiana being in the mix. Indiana had a win in the playing game over Wyoming. You got UCLA, who made a Final Four run here last year with the same squad, and Johnny Juzang being in the backcourt. UCLA, very solid overall in terms of their overall team composition as a 4 seed, I think has been tremendously overlooked. And I do like Indiana as a double-digit seed to make a run if the UCLA stumbles in any way, which works out for your alternate brackets if you're banking on seed value. So to me, this region, you can get a little bit more creative. I think far too many people are going to be kind of sucked into playing North Carolina as a spoiler to Baylor. While, yes, it's an 8-9 matchup between North Carolina and Marquette. I do think North Carolina should win that opening round matchup. I'm not sold on this North Carolina squad being good enough to take out Baylor. And truth be told, it's one of the most popular upsets that folks keep picking. So in terms of getting different, I think this is a spot where you're actually better off sticking with the chalk. So let me run the numbers by you, if I may. Baylor ranks 4th on KenPom overall, but in terms of offensive efficiency, top 10. Defensive efficiency, they're in the top 15. And no real areas of concern in terms of weakness on the squad. The only thing you can knock them for was the non-conference strength schedule once you start adjusting for how teams perform during the year, but you can't control that. Baylor beat teams early in the season who didn't perform as well to close out the year. And, I can't really begrudge them after the fact. At the time, some of those wins looked pretty good on paper. Now, Baylor had a solid year in the Big 12. We could talk about how highly respected Kansas and Texas Tech are on paper, but realistically, you're talking about a Baylor squad who's high in the RPI rankings, high in KenPom rankings, and a North Carolina squad with a down year in the ACC in general. They're ranked 30th in KenPom, and defensively is where UNC has their struggles. This is the same issue I bring up with Duke, but UNC is even more pronounced with their inability to stop baskets all over the court. I think Baylor should be able to get buckets wherever they're looking for in that potential matchup. And the reason why I have concerns about UNC is that, yes, I think they can beat Marquette, but I don't think that Marquette game is a complete walkover either. There is a definite route for Marquette to get there. That Marquette's got to shoot the ball well, obviously, but it's not the craziest thing in the world that UNC could drop that game to Marquette if Marquette has a decent day shooting the rock from beyond the arc. So to me, I don't necessarily buy into the UNC upset narrative as much as others have been calling for it. Yes, UNC has the talent to knock off Baylor, but they haven't shown the consistency. And you got to remember, when you're calling for an upset, it's a less than 24. It's really a 24-hour turnaround, but it's a less than 48-hour turnaround total because you're trying to win your game. The assistant coaches are pulling the tape on the other squad. I'm sure they've already been started prepping for Baylor before so many assistant coaches are doing the advanced scouting prep on Baylor as the rest of the teams prepping for Marquette. My whole area of concern if I'm UNC is I know I'm not a good defensive team as is. What are we going to learn in less than 2 days that's going to make us substantially better in the NCAA tournament? There's not a whole lot Hubert Davis can do. So to me, I think the inherent flaws within UNC in general, they like to play fast and they'll give up buckets. And that's just the way it is. They're going to try to outscore you. I just don't see a scenario where they're going to outscore Baylor. And, for all the talk that you could say about, you got Armando Bacot and you got Brady Manick. If they can be a terror on the boards, UNC's dangerous, but we've seen this team not be able to get there. And I'm sorry, that defense is always a worry when you're in the tournament because if you can't play defense, sooner or later you're going to get blitzed by a squad that just starts shooting the ball well, and your offense is going to be stuck playing catch up, and it's not a good place to be. More often than not, I'd rather take a team that can play some defense than a team that can't play any defense and needs to outscore everyone just to be relevant. So, again, I see folks pivoting towards UNC. I don't see it. And, that's just the kind of way I look at it, from my perspective. In terms of the 5-12 matchup, Indiana versus St. Mary's. St. Mary's, it's an interesting situation because St. Mary's hangs their hat on their defense, but the Hoosiers are one of the best defensive teams in the country. In terms of a slugfest, is St. Mary's, again, top 10 defenses according to KenPom, and the Hoosiers were pretty much in the same boat. I believe I had them in the top 20 overall. I look at this as, again, depending on your bracket format, this is where you're kind of looking towards for an upset, just because you got two similar style defenses. Indiana doesn't really turn the ball over, and they get to the free throw line. That's a tricky spot when you're up against a team where, St. Mary's isn't one where if they fall behind, they can get back into a game. So they'll keep trying to play defense, but I kind of look at this as a case where if Indiana can somehow get up early enough, I think they can just salt away a lead against St. Mary's and get it done. And again, with your scoring format, this is where it's going to be kind of pivotal. Indiana's going to end up becoming a chalkier pick because of the fact that, it's a 5-12 upset. So it's not the craziest thing in the world to see Indiana getting some love from the general public. I would expect the general public, when it's all said and done, you're probably going to see Indiana be a 50-50 coin flip in terms of selections by the general public. And, I think that matchup in general is a coin flip. So to me, it's from a value point standpoint, I still like Indiana. I would think that the general public's going to start leaning more towards them as they know Indiana's playing in the tournament, as opposed to just seeing play-in game. So having that knowledge, I think folks are going to start making those selections more towards Indiana than just taking St. Mary's. So again, knowing how popular 5-12 upsets are with the general public, you're probably going to see more steam coming on Indiana. I don't think it matters. I think Indiana, again, you take that risk when it's a coin flip matchup and it's a 5-12, because depending on your scoring format, you're going to get those extra points from a 12 seed than you would technically the higher seed. So I think you want to lean in that Indiana direction. And again, I like UCLA in general, but it's not the craziest thing in the world if Indiana knocked off UCLA either. I just think that UCLA should be the ones capable of moving into the Sweet 16. And ultimately, in this bracket, I like Baylor in general. But I do think UCLA in that backcourt is good enough to cause problems in general as you start looking at potential teams that can take out Baylor. I think the public's probably leaning towards North Carolina. I really think it's more UCLA in that regard. And, truth be told, I would think UCLA matches up better against Baylor than even Kentucky does. Kentucky's road, realistically, you're looking at potential matchups against Texas, Virginia Tech, or Purdue. I don't necessarily like this bottom half of the draw to do much to contend against Kentucky. Obviously, you got Murray State, San Francisco as a potential second-round matchup. I don't think either squad presents that much of a challenge for Kentucky. Purdue is a solid enough squad, but I don't necessarily think they pose enough multi-dimensions, if you will, to their game to overcome the natural talent that Kentucky has on that roster. So to me, Kentucky is very chalky, but it's not bad chalk. So again, it depends on your scoring format, how you want to prep this. But I will say, though, that for this region, it's pretty cut and dry. You can keep picking Kentucky, but I will say that if it comes down to Kentucky in an Elite Eight matchup against Indiana, UCLA, or Baylor, I gotta be honest, I do like the fact that all three of those squads have more than a good shot at beating Kentucky. And getting different in terms of your brackets, you may want to consider getting off of what will likely be one of the chalkiest picks in the Final Four in Kentucky by making that pivot in the Elite Eight. That way you bank up your points with Kentucky, and you actually deviate from what the normal crowd pick's going to be, because in terms of Final Four picks, you're gonna see that Kentucky is most likely the fourth most popular pick amongst the public. People have Kentucky going in over Baylor. So Kentucky it's expected Kentucky is probably going to be about somewhere between 34 and 35% of picks. In general, Baylor is going to be under 30. And it's not a bad idea to pick either squad, in my opinion. But I do think that UCLA is flying under the radar again. At least we know this time that the talent of that squad did translate over this year, so it won't be as much of a shock. But, from a public perspective, I think you're probably looking at, maybe 10% of people pick UCLA to make another Final Four run. And it's not the craziest thing in the world. I think the models actually lend themselves pretty kindly to UCLA getting it done as a 4 seed. Now, again, depending on your pool, you may want to do the long shot Indiana bid if you're in a very large pool where you've got, 2,000-3,000 entries that you're trying to beat out and trying to get different. Indiana being would likely be less than 1% picked to make the Final Four. Not the craziest thing in the world. Now, if your bracket pool's in Indiana, obviously it's not going to be less than 1% people picking the Hoosiers to make a Final Four run. It's all about context, folks. But nationally, the Hoosiers are not going to be popular. So, to me, again, you can pick Kentucky to go all the way to the Elite Eight, and then you can get different by going with a less chalky Baylor pick. Or you can go with UCLA, who I think is the dark horse in that region, or the long shot in Indiana. That way, you're at least getting different enough in the region. And, it's not major differences that you are doing in this region where you're calling for a ton of upsets outside of Indiana. But it at least puts you in a good spot to rake in points. And you're in what will likely be pretty true to form matchups by and large, based off of where Vegas is leaning for some of these potential matchups. So, to me, that's where I would play the East region. It's like, kind of hold it true to form for where the odds makers would put these matchups. And then you can get different once you get to the Elite Eight level. But I wouldn't necessarily go too crazy about doing early round upsets outside of Indiana and St. Mary's, because I think that's a coin flip matchup. I think Indiana has more than a fair shot of winning that game. And, St. Mary's can win it too, but depending on the scoring format, it makes far more sense to take the lower seeded team if you can get the extra points out of it. So that does it for my thoughts in terms of the regions. I would say, just in terms of, again, overall thoughts of how you construct your roster for Final Four and everything else, depending on how large your pool is, you can get more creative with some of these Final Four selections. But more often than not, you're probably playing in a less than 100 person pool. You don't need to go overboard overthinking some of the upsets earlier on. You want to get those Elite Eight matchups as correct as possible. That way, your combinations should carry you the rest of the way through, and you'll box in the competition that picked a couple of upsets early, didn't get them, and, the rest of the way, your picks and their picks are pretty similar, but you're ahead in points, so they can't catch up to you more than likely. So, again, ways to think about how to approach your pool. So, I'm going to get out of here, but I will say that in terms of the final pool selections and whatnot, I do think in larger pools, Houston is definitely a consideration you have to throw out there. I would also say UCLA in large pools, definite consideration you can lean towards. But I would say from a game theory standpoint, because of how popular Tennessee and Villanova have been getting in the South region, going towards picking a winner, overall winner between Arizona and Houston might not be the worst case strategy to do it. And in the Midwest, if you want to lean towards Iowa, not a bad idea, because Iowa not terribly popular, but no one's necessarily going all the way with them winning the title either in large field pools. So again, it depends on how you want to play it out. But again, my thought process is kind of getting a sense of your scoring format, and also getting a little bit different from the general public where you can, because you don't necessarily have to nail every single pick. You just have to have strategy-wise be in the ballpark enough so that you banked in points to start blocking off the competition of what you would presume to be the eventual winners of the tournament. So, anyway, that's going to do it for me. Good luck, everyone, with your brackets, and enjoy the games. Have a good one, folks.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other major outlets.